Hi everybody, it's Nolan from Lightning Review. I'm here to talk a little bit about hockey history today. One of the things that I enjoy doing quite a lot as a part of my hockey fandom is engaging with other fans on in the Twitter or X community. And one thing that everybody has a lot of fun with on there is chatting with fans of other teams. With the fantastic two playoff series that took place over the last couple of years between Tampa Bay and Toronto, there's been a lot of opportunity for, shall we say, lively debate between fan bases of those teams. The Toronto fan base has a great deal of appreciation for the fact that they won the most recent of those two series, and I think they take a lot of pride in the fact that they won that first round series, and good on them. Something that comes up very often in debate about the value of winning that first round series is the fact that Tampa Bay has won recent cups. It is usually mentioned that Toronto has won a lot more cups, however. Tampa 3, Toronto 13 is what it stands at right now. So you can imagine that it's going to take an awful long time for any other team to catch up with Toronto's 13 wins. That's second only to Montreal. And, well, nobody's catching Montreal anytime soon. But something that is mentioned often there is that Toronto won all of their cups during the original six period or prior. So, of course, if you're counting that you've won a cup when there are only six teams competing, perhaps that is not as impressive as winning a cup when there are 30 or more teams competing. And it made me wonder the value of the different cups based strictly upon how many teams had to be beaten to win that cup. So I did a little spreadsheeting, and I took it back to 1917-18, which was the first NHL season. I didn't factor in prior cups, which would have given even more to Montreal and several more to Toronto. I didn't count those Toronto cups because that team has to be considered different from the current iteration of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The fact is, the NHL as it stands right now would not have existed if it weren't for the desire of the other owners of the National Hockey Association to specifically exclude that Toronto franchise because they hated the owners so much. So, starting with Toronto, as the champion of the first season, 1917-18, 1917/1918, we start counting forward. Now, this gives us 105 years with 103 champions because of the two missed years, 1919 because of the flu pandemic and 2005 because Gary Bettman wanted a salary cap. We get 103 winners. We get how many teams won? 23 different teams winning cups during that time. And we get a lot of different variables factoring in, especially in those early years. The first year that the cup was awarded, 1918, there were only 3 NHL teams at the end of the season because the Montreal Wanderers had their arena burned down and they suspended operations. However, the team that won the cup that year, Toronto, didn't have to only overcome those 2 teams because in those early years, the NHL competed for the Stanley Cup against the winners of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association. So we actually had 2 teams, each with 3 teams, meaning the winner, Toronto, beat 5 other teams. The PCHA was involved for, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. But they weren't the only league that took part. The West Coast Hockey League also participated in the competition for the Stanley Cup for 5 years. There was an overlap of 3 seasons when all 3 leagues were competing for the Stanley Cup, meaning that back in the 20s, there were 12 or sometimes 10 different teams competing for the Cup. That means the winner beat that many other teams. So, we then went through a period in the 30s, the 20s and 30s, when there were about 10 NHL teams, typically, meaning the winners of those cups beat 9 other teams. That number gradually lowered through the 30s and 40s until we eventually arrived at the original 6 period. So for each of those original 6 years, each winner would beat 5 other teams. Most of the original 6 years were dominated by 3 teams: Montreal, Toronto, and Detroit. During the through to the end of the 1967, the end of the original 6 period, Toronto and Montreal were tied with 13 cup wins each. Detroit was in 3rd place with 7 cups. During those 13 cup wins, Toronto beat 80 other teams in their championship seasons. Montreal was just behind them with 78 teams beaten in their cup wins. Detroit, again in 3rd place, 39 teams beaten in their cup wins. So, but once we hit the first big expansion, 1967 to 1968, where the NHL doubles in size from 6 to 12 teams, Toronto stops winning. Montreal doesn't. They continue to be as dominant through the late 60s through the 70s as they were in the original 6 period. Meaning, while Toronto stopped gathering cups and adding to their total of teams that they had beaten, Montreal starts jumping way ahead. That takes us through, and there were other, of course, teams that periodically won. Chicago, Boston, New York, they occasionally gathered cups as well. You get into the 70s, you have Philadelphia winning a couple of cups, and then up until the early 80s when you have the Islanders. Now, when the Islanders start winning, it's a 21-team league, meaning they won 4 consecutive cups in a 21-team league, meaning they beat 20 other teams each year. So they jump up to 80 teams winning. That's already tying the teams that Toronto beat in their 13 cup wins. We then get into the Edmonton Oilers years where they're dominant. They win 5 cups. All 5 of their cups were in a 21-team league, meaning that they jump way ahead of Toronto to 100 teams that they've beaten. Now, we keep adding teams through the 90s. The number of teams in the NHL goes from 21, 23, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Now we're up to 32, meaning that the more recent your win, the more it's worth for the number of teams you had to beat. When Tampa won their cup in 2004, it was a 30-team league, meaning they beat 29 other teams. When they won their cups in 20 and 21, it was a 31-team league, meaning that they beat 30 other teams each time. So for Tampa's 3 cup wins, they beat 89 other teams. Once again, with only 3 cup wins, they had to defeat more teams than Toronto did for all of their 13 cups. That's true for a few other teams with only 3 cup wins. For example, Colorado and New Jersey. Colorado beat 85 teams in their 3 cup wins. New Jersey beat 81 in their 3 cup wins. So as you can see, there's a lot of recency bias. The more recent your cup wins, the more valuable they are. That gives us, if you take a look at Detroit, they won 7 of their cups leading up to the original expansion. Through the golden era of the original 6, they won 7 cups, giving them 39 wins, 39 teams beaten. But then the 4 recent cups they won in the late 90s and the 2000s bounces them all the way forward to, oh good grief, 147 teams that they had to beat to win their total of 11 cups. So if we take a look at who's really leading the rush here, Montreal stands out as the golden standard. They won so many cups during the original 6 years. They won so many cups after. Even into the 80s and 90s, they were still winning cups. Not so often now, but hey, next year's another year. Montreal stands out. The Canadiens stand out with 238 teams that they have beaten to win their 23 cups. In second place, by a mile, is the Detroit Red Wings. 11 cup wins, 147 teams that they had to beat. Third place, Only 5 wins, but the Pittsburgh Penguins had to beat 128 teams to win those 5 cups. After that, it's Chicago. Some of their earlier championships were during a small league era, but they won 3 in the big league era, meaning that they've won 128. They had to beat 128 teams to win their 6 cups. We then hit Edmonton, 5 cups, 100 teams beaten. And then in 6th place is Tampa Bay. 89 teams beaten to win their 3 cups. Then, because it goes backwards in time slightly to when they were winning, Colorado and New Jersey follow afterwards. And then in 9th place is Toronto with their 13 cup wins, defeating 80 other teams. 80 other teams ties, of course, with the Islanders as well with their 4 cups. You then roll it back through Boston, LA, the Rangers, Flyers, the original Ottawa Senators, all the way down to the Victoria Cougars, who stand as the only non-NHL team to win. The Victoria Cougars had to beat 11 other teams to win their 1 Stanley Cup in 1925. So what's the point of all this? Cups are cups. All cups are equal. A cup is a cup. 13 cups. Congratulations, Toronto. That is a very, very big number, and it will be a very, very long time before any other team catches up with you, with the possible exclusion of Detroit close behind you with 11 cups. But not all cups are really equal. More recent cups are... it's not easy to win. Anyway, this was just for fun. I hope it sparks a little bit of discussion. If you want to shout at me or disagree with me, I'm on Twitter, or X, at Review Lightning. Tell me what you think. I'd love to hear it. Thanks a lot. Have fun, everybody. Go Bolts.